All right, here we are, MMFM Digital. We are back with an all new edition, back to back sessions this week. Yesterday, we had an amazing chat with Gloria Fan, who is a creative executive at Fox 21 Television. She had so many interesting notes and things to say about the industry in her run. And today, an equally impressive and cool guest from the 305. We have our good friend Alex Fumero, who will be joining us today. He is a producer, most recently completed the documentary feature film called Mucho Mucho Amor, and it is the story of the iconic legend Walter Mercado, which had a phenomenal premiere at the Sundance Film Festival this year and was getting ready for a really amazing event at the Miami Film Festival. So looking forward to going to that. But as we all know, we had a bit of a hiccup with that, so we're still all dealing with it. But, you know, in any case, it's going to be great to talk to Alex. He used to be an executive as well at HBO. He's a Miami native, a Cuban guy. So we are very, very, very excited to bring him in just a couple minutes into the broadcast. So a couple of things that are going on right now in the industry here is, as you know, we're all dealing with COVID. You know, one of the interesting things about Miami is that now, you know, they're making us all wear masks to go outside. Of course, in Miami, what I'm noticing is that all the masks seem to match the apparel, including the doggy strollers. So we're making the best of our situation the way Miami people do. Other interesting things in the news and how sort of people are kind of making do. I heard a story out of Oregon that apparently now there's such thing as a drive-through strip club. It sounds very Miami, but apparently, folks, this is a legitimate business in Oregon where you actually pull up to a drive-through, you order food, and while you're waiting, you can get a lap dance. So it's literally a pole dance, extra large. And the question becoming, does a shake come with those fries? People are becoming very, very creative. I think one interesting business that we could have here in Miami, and one of the saddest things about COVID, it has been the closing down of the Cuban cafeteria Ventanitas. I think that that has been devastating to our community. So my pitch to Uber Eats is, why not have one of the cafeteria ladies show up to your house every morning with a colada? I think that that would spice up the community. It would make us all very happy. And why not? Because who loves a good morning from your little old friendly cafeteria saying, oye, mi niño, no te has bañado. Tengo un cafecito pa' aquí, te lo voy a hacer fresquecito. And speaking of fresquecito, without further ado, I am so excited to bring into the broadcast my very good friend and a friend of Miami and the film industry in general, Alex Fumero. Alex.
Hey, what's up, man?
How are you, brother?
I'm all right. I'm all right.
Cool, man.
Surviving the quarantine out here.
I know we all are. Yeah, it's quite the thing. I didn't think that when we were having lunch in February that we'd be in quite this position in April.
No, no idea.
Yeah, no idea. And we were making the best of it. And you know, obviously, you as a film industry professional, obviously, we'll talk a little bit about your background. But you know, you guys had an incredible start to the year. With your latest film, Mucho Mucho Amor, and obviously a phenomenal premiere, great reviews coming out of Sundance, and then of course getting ready for the Miami event, which was unfortunately postponed. But if you want, just talk a little bit about that project and the journey of making that incredible documentary.
Yeah, man. I, like a lot of Miami kids, grew up watching Walter Mercado at my abuelita's house,
Right.
regularly, and was always fascinated by him, and didn't really I would make all kinds of noise. And at the time, I have a little sister now, but at the time I was an only child, and so I just entertained myself however I could in the house. It's, which was fine until Walter came on TV, and then it was like, shh, he's going to tell us the future.
Right.
And I was just sort of mystified by it, uh, and I grew up with a lot of questions about him, like, who is the wizard? How did someone with this kind of bizarre gender fluidity, get into all of these, like, fairly conservative households, and like
Right.
win them over. And so a couple years back, I met Kareem Tatch, who's another Miamian, runs O Cinema, and we got to talking, and the first thing we talked about was Walter Mercado, weirdly, and Walter was having that estate sale in Miami at his old apartment, and Kareem was going to go, and I was like, man, I would love to do a documentary about him. Have you thought about that? And he said, well, yeah, I'm going to buy capes, or hopefully, but I'm also going to see if I can meet someone in the family, and I said I would love to help. And at the time, I was at HBO as an exec. So I didn't know what my capability to help would be, right? Like, and Kareem made contact with the family, and around that time, I decided, I was like, I initially got into this to produce my own work. I'm not like a corporate guy, and something in my gut was like, I think this is the thing to branch out on. So I left HBO, and Kareem and I teamed up with this other incredibly talented filmmaker named Christina Costantini, who had gotten festival favorite at Sundance and South by the year before. And I had worked with her at Fusion, where I had been working before HBO, and really respected her. And she reached out to me out of the blue and said, I want to make a documentary about Walter Mercado. And I said, this is very weird, but in 30 minutes, I have a call, another director, to talk about this project. Maybe there's a way, we can all work on it together. I had, they have very different styles, so I had an instinct that it might be appropriate. And Kareem's a great archival dude, or that has been in his history. Christina was very verite oriented, and there were components of both in this. So from that, the project was born. I spent the last 2 years doing that, and we scraped together whatever pennies we could, to get it made. We got a great grant from Artes Miami, and we went from there and shot with Walter, met him, and we're fortunate enough to get accepted into the Sundance Film Festival and premiered there. And yeah, we got into a bunch of festivals. It was like it was high highs and then kind of low lows, We were accepted to Sundance and South by and True False and Full Frame and Hot Docs and all these, all the festivals we basically wanted to be a part of. And then as I went to Miami for the Miami Film Festival, which I was extremely excited about because this is so much of a Miami project. I'm a Miami boy, like, I'm wearing, the Heat, the Haslam Wade shirt right now.
Love it.
Like, and I had my full sequin tuxedo jacket ready to go, like literally a day into my trip down there, 2 days before we were going to premiere in Miami, this festival shut down, and the whole COVID thing started to happen. And I didn't even realize how severe it was at the time. I was like, damn, this is a bold reaction, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll just go to the beach for the rest of the weekend. And then came back to California, and everyone was like, what the fuck were you doing at the beach, bro? Like, you need to be on lockdown, and ever since we've been here, but we have a lot to be grateful for. We got that great premiere at Sundance, and we got picked up by Netflix just before the festival. And so, yeah, it'll be on Netflix July 8th, and hopefully everybody in Miami can check it out then. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I wasn't sure the exact date, but I'm glad we get to tell our fans here that July 8th, you'll be able to stream Mucho Mucho Amor on Netflix. That's going to be amazing. Obviously a lot of folks are binging right now, so
I know.
And it's absolutely incredible. Apparently now Netflix is worth more than IBM and all the top blue chip companies. And it's just a meteoric rise for that company over the past couple years. But yeah, speaking of meteoric rises, it seems like this documentary, based on everything you say, to quote Walter, was written in the stars somehow, how y'all kind of just came together to put this project.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you mentioned, obviously you watched them as a kid. A lot of Latino households in Miami did. Do you think that was at least maybe subconsciously part of the inspiration of you wanting to get into the entertainment industry when you look back?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe something about Walter's, fabulousness and the attention that he commanded subconsciously influenced that. But I think I was always a little bit of like a ham, and I liked performing when I was a kid, and so who knows? Maybe I was also drawn to Walter because I saw parts of myself in Walter. Who knows?
Sure. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, then obviously, like you said, just always into that idea. When did you first think that maybe this is something you could pursue professionally? Was that something that came early on, or something you kind of stumbled into after school?
Well, when I was a kid, I did like some kind of like I did a little bit of like child acting. Like I was in an episode of Miami Vice when I was very
Hmm.
young, and the Spanish sitcom called Corte Tropical. And so like I always thought I wanted to be an actor was the thing. And I went to acting school. I went to NYU Tisch.
Oh, wow.
And while I was there, that we were encouraged to always produce our own work. And so I just started kind of doing that. And I was like, oh, I really like this producing thing.
Hmm.
So I always knew I was always committed to doing something in the arts. I thought it was a performance career at first, and the longer I did that professionally, the less I was sort of interested in the idea of like getting cast in a role or playing a character. And the more I was like, oh, I like kind of making the thing. I like being in charge of the story and
Right.
like putting together the pieces. Um, and it wasn't until I got involved with some folks down there in Miami, and we made some short films, and one of those films got into Sundance. It was called Zemo Land, and it was a short animated film by another Miamian, Daniel Cardenas Katz, who's out here, is a really talented animator, and a fellow Kirat actually.
Hmm.
And that film got into Sundance as a short, and I was like, maybe this is like a sign. And so I got my first kind of like out of that, I parlayed it into my first industry job at Pantaleon Films, which is like a Latino studio out here that Lionsgate owns. And that was like how I kind of like finally fully transitioned to that path and felt like there was a road to doing this professionally. Like I didn't really understand how people made money doing this. Before then it was just sort of like I wait tables and I make weird plays and movies on the side. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And getting that job helped me learn like how this business is the biz side of show biz, right?
Hmm. Yeah, no, of course, and that's something that I think, yeah, we all have to kind of discover whether you want to pursue a more creative path or a more business or technical path. Yeah, you kind of have to figure out the business side at some point, and
Yeah.
it's very interesting. It seems like you took what I like to call the Bob Evans approach, who started as an actor and said, "Hey, I want to be the guy calling the shots. I don't want to be the scared guy that if the director doesn't like it, I'm getting kicked off the set." So it's
Exactly.
it's interesting. Yeah, it's a lot of creative folks that realize that there's a lot more to this than just being in front of the camera. Which is nothing to
Hmm.
say against that. I mean, I think some of the most talented people in the
No.
world are in front of the camera. Obviously you experienced it with Walter and his charisma and how much that meant. I mean, became a global icon for that community, obviously for our community and beyond.
Hmm.
So I think it's fantastic. And so let's talk a little bit more about your run at HBO. How did you transition? I guess you mentioned you were at Pantaleon first, and then you transitioned over to HBO afterwards.
I was at Pantaleon, then I went to Fusion for
Okay.
3 years. And that was my first. They gave me a real shot there to be a real creative executive. I basically oversaw all the comedy and news programming coming out of the West Coast,
Hmm.
and and it was Wild Westy. I mean, like it was a network kind of. It was like a little bit of Lord of the Flies, like.
Hmm.
Isaac Lee, the CEO's strategy at the time was like hire young people who are smart and can figure it out rather
Wow.
than experienced old people, right? So that we could try to do something new, which also has its pros and cons.
Right.
But man, I learned quick, and I got to work with Paul F. Tompkins and Chris Gethard and all these kind of like alt comedy people who I really respected, and that kind
Hmm.
of became my niche. Um, and the good thing about Fusion was that it was really multi-platform, and I was doing a really wide array of things that were scripted, things that were unscripted, things that were news, things that were comedy, things that were for Facebook, things that were for the linear channel. And so HBO was looking for someone specifically who had a kind of range of experience, who understood working with diverse talent, and as someone who was diverse himself, like that helped, and who could program for HBO Now and HBO Go, because at the time they really wanted to explore what programming on those platforms would look like. And that ended up changing while I was there. There was a change in leadership. There's a change in strategy. That is like that's the kind of stuff that happens at the corporate level. But that's how I got my foot in the door, was, that most are specialists, not generalists. And I had this kind of unique experience of having been a generalist. And that helped me get there. And they happened to want, we had common views on what comedians we respected and what kind of programming we were interested in. So, yeah.
No, that's great. And it seems like, obviously you work with some really interesting, two dope queens. Obviously, there was a Jon Stewart project, right? Then of course, Bill Simmons and Felipe Esparza, Chris Gethard, obviously. What was it kind of like working with some of these, especially obviously, guys that are so funny, so much like, into their world and their humor, and kind of crafting a show out of that?
Well, I mean, look, a lot of it, to be frank, is trying to get out of their way. Like, I think the philosophy at HBO, and part of what makes the programming there so special, is that there's definitely development that goes on. And I think the executives are known to have great notes and be smart folk. But at its core, it's about investing in talent and stories that you believe in from the get-go, so that hopefully you're not trying to sort of turn it into something that it isn't. And I think that, unfortunately, that happens a lot of times in our business, where executives, and I think it's well-meaning, like I think an executive will see that something is like 70% what they want,
Right.
And they think they can sort of muscle that extra 30% out of it, but when you're an artist, you have a vision for what you want, and that, like it or not, that product is going to turn out its best when the artist is able to see his vision through, right? And so I think at HBO that was a lot of the attitude. So, like, I mean, with folks like Jon Stewart, it's like, what am I going to tell Jon Stewart? You know what I mean? Like, come on, the guy's a genius. I mean, he was at the time trying to do an incredibly ambitious digital project that involved real-time animation, and so a lot of what I did was try to figure out how close or how far we were from being able to launch it, and if we were able to launch it, and try to be supportive in whatever other ways possible. But for the most part, it was like, whatever Jon wants to do. And ultimately, to his credit, and I think this is what makes him such a genius, is that, like, he was like, this is not going to get there. Like, we're not going to, like, the tech isn't ready,
Sure.
And he was right. With stand-up specials, sometimes you come in early enough that you give notes, and on Gethard special, there was a little bit of that, but for the most part, just making sure that it's captured in its best quality, right? Like, a stand-up has been working on it primarily in relationship to a live audience for so long, and that is their gauge for how well they're doing, right? So they're necessarily thinking about how it's shot or how it's going to play to a television audience, which is totally different. And so as an exec, we try to put the team around them that will bring that show to life in the style that it's in. It's hard to take things that are meant to be on stage in a live audience and give them a kind of cinematic feel. And with, like, a project like Two Dope Queens, I just, like, a straight up a fan of Phoebe and Jessica for years. And when I started at HBO, I was like, we need to do Two Dope Queens, like that. They need to have a show. And at the time, each of them were pursuing their own projects, and so they didn't have the bandwidth to do it together.
Right.
But I just kept kind of checking in, and then finally their agent called and said, "I have good news for you. Their schedules are lined up, and they want to do something. Can we pitch it to you?"
Wow.
I took my took my boss to a show, and she liked it also, and we went from there. And then it's just about like, who are the guests, what's the structure of the show going to be, etc.
Right.
But I think the best execs are good tastemakers that are relatively hands off in terms of trying to like push the creative in a certain direction, but are giving notes and feedback about whether that specific vision is clear and coming across. Because I think that you're like the smartest audience member in a way.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my experience there. Yeah.
Wow. No, it makes a lot of sense because, like you said, some of these folks that you happen to work with are, like you said, some of the top comedic minds working today. So, like you said, a lot of it is just really going with their vision and letting them explore those creative angles.
Yeah.
And you look at probably one of the best examples of that is the Chappelle Show and what David was able to do. Obviously with and talk about sort of almost a seamless transition from his stand-up routine into a show, and how he was just able to wind everything into that sketch comedy format. And obviously with his raw talent, just absolutely brilliant. What they were able to do as
Mm-hmm.
well. And then obviously what you guys did with Two Dope Queens and all the other shows that kind of came through that pipeline. So I guess the question is, with all that great work that seemed to be coming out of HBO and working with such talent, you mentioned before that your heart wasn't really in the corporate world. So at what point did you decide, all right, I want to kind of go on my own and produce my own things?
Well, a couple of things happened. I mean, one, I was hired to do those types of shows and also to program shows for HBO Now and Go. And so when that went, my volume of work really wasn't there. And if you look at HBO, and I'm not talking about HBO Max, that's a new thing now, but HBO doesn't really do a lot, like when you look at their slate, they release, you know, they have original programming, usually for the most part twice a week, sometimes three times a week if they have specials or docs on a Wednesday, right? Like it's not like
Mm-hmm.
a regular channel that's programming around the clock. So the amount of work there was to do, um, I mean, there was work to do, but the amount of projects that you could get involved with had started to have limitations for me,
Oh,
um, and I didn't think, my aspiration was always to tell more narrative stories, whether they're in doc form or scripted form.
mm,
And the opportunity to do that was really on Now and Go. That was like that side of it. And then this other part of it was the alternative group, where it's like more stand-up specials and talk shows and that kind of thing. And that I still like that, but it's not the only thing I wanted to be focused on, right? And so I kind of
right.
found myself in a position where I was like, look, this could be a good career path, right? It's a stable career path. But is this what you want to do? And I was
Right.
living in New York at the time, and my wife and I, the job was out of New York, and my wife and I didn't really want to be living in New York, and I just kind of had one of those third life crises or whatever you want to call it. And I
Right.
think my boss could tell that I was like, that my heart wasn't in it. And I looked at the path that I had gone down, and I realized, like a lot of people, I'm the son of immigrants. My parents worked their asses off, you know what I mean, so that I could do this bougie ass shit that I do. And so there was a part of me, I think, that had been taking opportunities because I wanted to learn and grow in my career, but also because they were just good opportunities, right? And I got to a point where I said, how far from where we originally came have we gotten? When I was in Miami, I mean, it was like, yeah, me estaba comiendo un cable, as Cubans say.
Right.
But I was producing work that I loved, that I was enjoying, you know what I mean? That
Mm-hmm.
that felt important to me, that was connected to Miami, by the way, which is that period was like a very fruitful creative period for me when I moved back to Miami after New York. And
Mm.
and I was like, the pendulum has swung a little too far in the other direction.
Right.
Um, and so when Kareem and I had that conversation, and I felt the excitement that I had about this project, and I realized how like on HBO, at least at the time, maybe different now, there's some different folks there, but like how on HBO the project seemed, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
I was like, I was like, man, like I feel like you're being called in a different direction. And I'm a
Wow.
guy who's like, I try to live more based on my intuition than I can be pretty cerebral. And so I try to avoid that. It usually gets me into trouble.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that was basically it, man. It was not an easy choice. I also chose not to pursue another job. Like after you've been at HBO, there are opportunities, you're
Sure.
fortunate enough that people are like, do you want to, run a production company? Like, what do you want to do? And I kind of said, I think I need to do my own thing for a while. So I started my own company, Key Rat Inc. is what it's called. Uh, and I've been doing that ever since. And, so far, so
Wow.
good.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting that you kind of had also this creative calling, like you said, the most creative times being in Miami. You mentioned working with Zemoland. I think that was one of the Borscht films, right, earlier on. And
Right.
that whole group and collective, and since then, a couple of other groups that have sprung up doing amazing creative work out of Miami. But like you said,
Right.
yeah, I guess the hard thing that we have to balance down here is you mentioned comiendo el cable. It's not as I guess financially rewarding to do it out of Miami as it
No.
would be in LA or New York, right? So how do you balance those two things? Some have tried to make it work.
Yeah.
It's funny. We just got a comment from Facebook from Eric Gennard, who gives you a shout out.
That's the homie.
Yes, yeah, yeah. He literally said,
Eric makes it
"Coño."
work. Eric makes it work big time. He's really doing it. Yeah, there are
Yeah,
guys that do it. I mean, look, he's making it work. Kareem is local. Kareem makes it work. Billy and Alfred make it work.
right,
Rock and Tour. I think there's definitely ways to do it, but I think there's just different pros and cons. Like when you go
right,
to New York and LA, you're also in a sea of people all trying to do the same thing. You know
right,
what I mean? Like
right,
one of the wonderful things about being in Miami was that it was a place that did feel like maybe the scale of the project that I could accomplish was not as big as somewhere else, like New York or LA, but the volume and the ease to get something done if you get the right people around you was there,
hmm,
and over time, if you stick to it and build a career and a name for yourself, and frankly, también en Miami hay un relajo de madre, and so there's people who are like, bro, I want to make movies, but then they're
right,
like 20 minutes late to call, you know what I mean? Or like,
right,
they don't behave professionally. And
right,
so the guys that behave professionally get ahead, that's just a fact. And so, I think there's a way to do it. For me, I wanted to be outside of Miami and be able to, I wanted to take that risk and be on like in a kind of bigger pond.
right.
But I would not have been able to do it. Like I got my first Hollywood job because of a project that I developed and produced in Miami,
Hmm,
and got financing for in Miami. Um,
right.
yeah,
Yeah, no, and that makes all the sense in the world. It's like, you need that kind of stepping stone and that calling card, especially like I said, in places like LA where there's so many folks that are trying to do the same exact thing. So the question becomes, and how do you stand out? And it's interesting to say that, Miami, even though, from like I said, an industry standpoint, from a professionalism standpoint, maybe not all the way there yet. We're getting a lot better. I think we are. But definitely a place that if you are a creative type, it's easier to get certain things done, perhaps down here than other towns. So I think that's fantastic, and obviously trying to bring all this back full circle. Like now you have this project. It's going out into Netflix. I know you've done some other work for them before. So I guess the question now is, other than watching your film on Netflix in July, what's next for Alex?
who knows, man? I have a bunch of stuff in the pipeline. I'm in development on two different projects right now. Um, that haven't been announced yet. And then I have a bunch of stuff in the slate. I'm writing also. I have a couple of
Hmm,
projects that I'm writing that are set in Miami. Um, so we'll see. Like it's a weird time right now with the whole
right.
COVID thing. I I think people are very hungry for content and at the same time struggling to wrap their mind on how that stuff will get made.
Hmm,
Um, so, just I'm using this time with my partners to just hit the grindstone, and like,
Right.
let's have everything ready to go so that the moment that people are ready to start producing shit, like there's a pipeline.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, man. But
Right.
uh, I'm staying busy, and that's the good thing.
Well, that's good. Like I said, it is definitely a time to kind of sit quietly with yourself and develop new material for sure.
Yeah.
But obviously, since you're out in LA now, you're a little closer to the industry. Has there been any more talk about potentially when they think they might like to get back to work? I know earlier on they were thinking June. Now it's more like September. But what is there any insights that you can give to the production community here?
I honestly, I'm hearing all kinds of shit, and on one project that I'm in development on, the head of this studio was saying to me that he felt like we might be able to start shooting something in like June.
Hmm.
It's a small crew project. It's more docu oriented, and he felt like those types of projects will be able to be out in the world at that time. And he's a smart guy who knows a lot of people who know a lot of things. So maybe he's right. I don't know. But then I hear other people, sort of saying we don't really know what to buy right now because we don't know what we can actually produce. I know, and just reading stuff that folks are writing, like I know Gloria Calderon-Kellett was interviewed and wrote this whole thing about like, what it would look like to actually even be able to produce something on a studio lot, right? And how
Hmm.
challenging that would be, and how they might have to sequester the entire cast and crew and quarantine them in order to get it done. And is that viable? And can you trust that everybody's going to stick to the rules? And
Right.
so, I think that unfortunately the answer is still a lot of uncertainty with a lot of hope that sooner rather than later. But I don't think anybody really knows, even the sort of most connected folks at the top of the industry.
Right. No, you're totally right. And I have followed some of these trade articles about all this different sort of proposals that they're floating around now. Like you said, from quarantining crews, making everybody stay in hotels, even if they're locals, to this idea that I think there's an Australian telenovela that went back this week where they're producing in pods. So I guess there are four different crews that are shooting. So if one crew goes down or gets infected, the other three continue to work or something like that.
It's
And then
crazy.
the craziest story I heard, and obviously, of course, there's a Florida connection, that apparently Mickey Rourke did a film in Latvia that shot throughout this entire
Yeah,
thing and just wrapped like last week.
yeah, I heard that.
So yeah, but it's interesting you mentioned the smaller stories, and this may be an interesting, once we come out of it, a mini golden era for the indie producer, because like I said, guys that work in the indie world like myself and the stuff that you've done early on is, we know how to work with small crews and be light on our feet, and so maybe that's something that at least can help kickstart the industry again before we get
Yeah,
back into like Avengers 10 or whatever.
yeah, I think so. And I also think, one of the biggest challenges when you're independent, and especially starting off, is that having an audience is hard, right? And now you
Mm,
have a captive audience, literally, right? So not only thinking about how do I develop projects that'll get bought, but like, back when I was doing these short films, I just wanted people to see them. You know what I mean? So if there's anything that you can get done now that you can put out and independently distribute, like,
yeah.
it's not a bad time to do that. You know
No.
what I mean?
Right.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes all the sense in the world. And obviously, again, I had my ticket. I was so excited to see your film at the Miami Film
I know.
Festival. But, we're all still obviously rooting for you. And we're so happy and grateful that we are going to be able to see it in July, July 8th. So everybody out there in Miami, if you're listening, July 8th, get your Netflix subscription if you don't already have one, and definitely tune in to see Mucho Mucho Amor. It's going to be amazing, and I think it's going to be probably one of the most dare I say, uplifting stories to see once we're hopefully out of this thing. So maybe there was a reason for that as well, as Walter would probably say, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe this is the
It's
first.
all Walter's got the whole plan somewhere up there. Yeah.
It was written by Walter, so this is our getting out of Corona movie. I think is for everyone, right?
Yep.
Well, Alex, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on our show. Like I said, next time for sure we'll be in person, hopefully back at our
Thanks,
beautiful
bro.
Biltmore. But congratulations on all the great work, and I can't wait to see what's next, man.
Thanks so much, man, and great to see you. Even though it's via you know uh, Zoom or whatever this is
Right.
called, Stage
This
10.
yeah. This is another idea. Digital studio. See, we got a whole TV studio in our computer. Well, I'm going to put you back in the let's call it the green room for a second, and just sign
Okay.
on, and I'll bring you right back. Hang on one second. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was amazing. I want to thank my special guest, Alex Fumero, today. Again, I am your host, J.L. Martinez with MMFM Digital. I hope you will join us on a weekly basis as we bring new and ever interesting guests from the film and entertainment industry. And we're going to be back again very soon with another amazing guest and just kind of keep the chatter going for the industry and always talking about what's going on and what's next. Of course, I want to thank my partners, Patty Arias, Joe Chi, the president of Kamacol, our host organization, for helping us to bring all of this to you guys on a weekly basis. And until then, as I always say, happy streaming.